For over 1,000 days, I have been on the carnivore diet, which means the only foods I have consumed are meat and eggs. I haven't consumed any fruits or vegetables. Now, according to the mainstream, my blood work should be horrific. My kidney function should be non-existent. My quote, bad cholesterol should be through the roof. Today, we're going to break down my blood work and see if any of this is actually true. Let's start with testosterone. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that I've been on a cut for the last 3 months or so. I've dropped 20 pounds, so my food intake has been relatively low. Normally when people my age who are naturals and not injecting themselves with testosterone reduce their food intake and get very lean, their testosterone levels essentially every time tank to levels that you'd expect to see in elderly men. This is because when you have minimal body fat, your body decides to optimize for its own survival rather than reproduction, so it downregulates the hormones that are responsible for testosterone production. While that's at least what the leading hypothesis has been for a very long time, and even in women we see this. Women typically, when they get very lean, their hormones tank and they lose their period. However, despite cutting down, my testosterone remains high at 25.6 nanomoles per liter, which translates to 738 nanograms per deciliter. The reference ranges for testosterone where I got my blood work done are between 8.7 and 29 nanomoles per liter, or 251 to 836 nanograms per deciliter. So even despite having a relatively low food intake for some time, my testosterone remains high. For context, Alex Eubank, who was a famous fitness influencer, in the past when he had his testosterone checked at a similar body fat to mine, his testosterone had dropped down to 215 nanograms per deciliter. And in the past when I've cut down, I never had my testosterone measured, but I had all the symptoms of low testosterone. And every single person I know who is a natural and eats a high carbohydrate diet, when they cut down and get lean, their testosterone, it tanks also. I know many people my age that are lean gym bros and they actually have lower testosterone levels than Alex did. My perspective on this now is that I suspect the main driver as to why so many people experience these hormonal issues when getting lean isn't strictly due to this whole optimizing for survival hypothesis, but it is instead because they aren't eating enough saturated fats, which are actually the building block for hormones. The only people I know who maintain high testosterone levels even when at a low body fat are the other carnivore guys online. And I've also heard many examples of women who talk about how they have lost their periods in the past and they thought it was because they were very lean. However, now that they're on carnivore, they're the same body fat percentage and have no issues. So if you want to preserve hormonal function whilst looking good, in my experience, the carnivore diet is the best way to do this. And also, for those of you accusing me on steroids, here is my FSH and LH. FSH is a follicle stimulating hormone. This is actually what stimulates sperm production in males, and LH is a luteinizing hormone, which is what stimulates the testes to produce testosterone in males. Now, what happens when you take testosterone exogenously and inject yourself with it is your brain detects these high levels and it stops telling your testes to produce their own. So your pituitary shuts down FSH and LH production through this negative feedback, and these numbers, they crash to near zero. Now, the reference range for FSH is between 2 and 12, and mine came back at 8.9. And for LH, it's between 2 and 9, and mine is 4.1. Now, I would love for my free testosterone to have been included in here. Free testosterone is the portion of testosterone in your body that isn't bound to proteins and is actually able to enter your cells. But here in New Zealand, the blood panels doctors allow are genuinely a joke. I'm not joking when I say this. Last time I went to get my blood work done, right? I asked for my testosterone to be included. Here in New Zealand, they don't typically include it in just regular old blood panels. And my doctor just turns to me and he says, "Well, do you get erections?" And then after a rather awkward conversation, he just simply flat out refused to test for my testosterone. It's ridiculous. This time I actually had to go to a different doctor and, I don't want to use the word lie, but come up with a few symptoms that I don't have just to get my testosterone checked. That's how ridiculous it is. Anyway, testosterone is excellent, not on steroids. Good start. Next up, we have the thyroid panel. Now, a lot of people say that a low carbohydrate diet is stressful on the thyroid. There's no scientific literature that supports this, but this is a claim that a lot of people throw around. And my results reflect this. TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. This measures how hard your pituitary gland is working to produce hormones. A high TSH level would indicate that your thyroid is sluggish and it has to work really hard to produce these hormones, whereas a low normal TSH means the thyroid is running all well. The reference ranges for TSH are between 0.27 and 4.2, and mine is at 0.78, which is right in the sweet spot. Again, after months of being in a deficit, this is pretty impressive. When you're eating less food for a long time, often what happens is your body downregulates the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis. It does this in order to conserve energy and slow metabolism so you don't run out of stored body fat, but my level's still pretty good. Dozens of studies have replicated this finding, and evolutionary this makes sense. Our bodies don't know this wonderful thing up the road called a supermarket exists, so your body thinks because you're eating less that there must be some sort of food scarcity going around, maybe there aren't many animals left or whatnot, so naturally it'll bring this down so you're burning less energy and you don't die of starvation. But despite this, TSH is excellent and the strong testosterone reading backs it up too. Typically what happens when thyroid function drops is that the whole hormonal cascade suffers, and one of the first things to go is testosterone levels. So very clearly based on testosterone levels and TSH levels, all is well here. Next up, we have liver function. This is another area where people say that the carnivore diet causes problems. Now, the theory behind this is that a low carbohydrate intake results in your body having to produce a larger amount of glucose. This is supposedly stressful to the liver, as the liver is where this glucose is created. It creates this glucose from fats and proteins, but this claim is very unsupported, and again, that is what we see reflected in my blood results. The 4 liver markers I had tested were bilirubin. This measures how well your liver clears waste from red blood cell breakdown. The reference range is less than 25, mine is 8. Also alkaline phosphate. This is an enzyme that removes phosphate groups from molecules, which is an essential process for liver function. The reference range for this is between 40 and 110, mine is 75. There's also GGT, or gamma glutamyl transferase. This is a liver enzyme that assists in breaking down toxins. The reference range for this is less than 60, mine is 13. There's also alanine aminotransferase. Now this is actually more of a short-term marker that reflects liver health over the past days to weeks. It's not a long-term marker like these other 3 liver markers that we've just looked at. The reference range for this is less than 45. Mine is 41, so overall everything looks good. The only marker here on the higher end is ALT, which like I just explained is a short-term marker. This reflects what's been going on with your liver in the short term, and I must confess something here. I have a little secret that I'm going to tell to only you, and you can't tell anyone else. This blood test here, I did it when I just got back from a holiday. Now, on this holiday, I may or may not, on 1 or 2 nights, consumed a whiskey or 2. Not confirming or denying anything, but I would speculate that if I did have a whiskey or 2 on 1 or 2 nights, that the reason my ALT is not perfect is because of that whiskey. So I'm going to attribute that right there to my hedonistic actions and not my dietary choices. Nowadays I do drink very infrequently, simply because I hate not feeling my best, and there's the obvious health consequences, but from time to time on special occasions like being on holiday, I will sometimes have a couple. As we all know, alcohol is terrible for liver, hence why my ALT is slightly on the high end. But as a whole, all my other liver markers that actually reflect long-term health are perfect, so all good here. The only thing that can throw off your liver markers, if you're truly carnivore, is an electrolyte imbalance. When your electrolytes are imbalanced, this leads to dehydration. And when you're dehydrated, your blood becomes more concentrated, meaning the same amount of enzymes are in less fluid, which can skew your liver enzymes and kidney markers. Now, many people do fine on meat and salt alone, but many people, especially when starting out, release a lot of water weight, and as that water passes through your body, it pulls electrolytes right out with it. This can result in what's referred to as keto flu, which is essentially where you experience headaches, fatigue, and muscle cramping. I've heard many people say they feel a lot better, including a good, high-quality electrolyte supplement on Carnivore. The problem is, 99% of electrolyte products are terrible. Most use table salt loaded with microplastics and heavy metals like lead, arsenic, and cadmium. These are forever toxins that appear to cause cancer. Even the clean-looking ones have poor dosing ratios that make your electrolyte balance worse, and almost all of them use cheap chloride forms of magnesium and potassium. This is why I use SaltR. This is a company started by someone from the carnivore community who was sick of seeing so many low-quality electrolytes. He actually runs the biggest carnivore convention each year. Their salt comes from a remote fishing village in Norway, which is one of the cleanest waterways in the world, and it's one of the only electrolyte and salt companies that test virtually undetectable for heavy metals and microplastics. They're also the only company I have found who formulates with potassium gluconate and magnesium glycinate. These are the best forms of potassium and magnesium. These are also perfectly dosed with higher trace minerals. I use the unflavored version, but they've also got flavored options lightly sweetened with stevia. Even their citric acid comes from real fruit, not fermented mold from corn syrup like nearly all other citric acids are. Plus they have a salt shaker that's perfect for extra minerals and crunch on your steak. So if you're a carnivore and your energy isn't where you want it, SaltR is the best product out there. I wouldn't put my name behind them if I didn't truly believe that. If you use my code MAXG, you can get 10% off. Their website is the top link in the description. Thanks to SaltR for making videos like these possible. Next up, we have kidney function. Again, this is yet another area where, a carnivore diet will supposedly cause issues. I think the alleged mechanism here is high protein intake is supposedly stressful. But again, this is not the case by looking at my creatinine levels. Creatinine is a waste product from muscle metabolism. This gets filtered through the kidneys, and high levels mean your kidneys aren't filtering it well. The reference range is 60 to 105 micromoles per litre, and mine is at 83. There's also EGFR, which estimates the kidney filtration rate. This is only recorded as greater or less than 90. Now, the reason you don't get a specific number for this like you do with most other markers is the equation they use is derived from studies of people with kidney disease. So it's well calibrated for detecting reduced function, but once you hit that 90 mark, the equation becomes inaccurate, so they can't really give you an exact number. So labs just report it as less than 90 means you're in normal range and everything appears to be filtering well. So good news again here, kidneys are great. I've actually eaten a very high protein diet since about the age of 14. For most of my life I consumed over 200 grams of protein per day. Reduced that a bit now, but even despite all of this protein intake, kidneys, they're looking good. Well, looking good on paper I should say. I haven't really examined my own kidneys, but I'm sure they're looking pretty good in there. Next up, we have the iron levels. Ferritin is a measurement of stored iron. We need iron for a number of reasons. In particular, our red blood cells use it to carry oxygen to every tissue in our bodies. Now, having suboptimal iron levels is certainly something you don't want. When iron levels are too low, people typically find that they're exhausted all the time. And then if you have very high iron on the higher end, you can actually get organ damage. This is because it produces a very high amount of free radicals. There's actually a condition for this called hereditary hemochromatosis. So ferritin levels are very important. Certainly don't want too low or too high. My ferritin is 254 micrograms per litre. Reference range is between 20 and 320, so again, right where it should be. Then complete blood count, hemoglobin, red blood cells, white blood cells, etc. They're all sitting in healthy ranges. I won't bore you by going through each one. You can see them on screen. If you're super interested in my complete blood count, feel free to pause the video and have a good look. And then finally, we have inflammation markers and cholesterol. Let's start with inflammation. Now, ideally here we would have CRP. This is one of the best markers for looking at body-wide systemic inflammation. But again, it wasn't tested for. It is ridiculous that that is not a part of a standard panel. I said to the doctor, I said, "Doc, I want you to give me everything. The full works, the most comprehensive blood test mankind's ever seen." Okay, well, I didn't exactly say it like that, I was a little bit more civilized than normal. But I told her I wanted everything tested as much as possible, and somehow even CRP is not on here. We do have triglycerides, however. These measure inflammation by reflecting how much excess fat is circulating throughout your blood. For the reference ranges for this, we want it less than 2 millimoles per litre, which comes out to 177 milligrams per deciliter. And mine are at 0.8 millimoles per litre, or about 71 milligrams per deciliter. So again, triglycerides are very good. And then based on everything else we've seen through here with the GGT, globulin, albumin, the blood cell readings, etc., it all points to very low systemic inflammation. And then finally, we have cholesterol. My HDL, the quote, good cholesterol, is 1.75 millimoles per litre, which is about 68 milligrams per deciliter. The reference range is above 1 millimoles per litre or above 39 milligrams per deciliter, so that's very high, all good. However, my LDL, the bad cholesterol, wow, what do we have here? This is the cholesterol that supposedly clogs arteries. The reference range for LDL is below 3.4 millimoles per litre, which translates to 131 milligrams per deciliter. And mine, well, it is high. It's 3.6 millimoles per litre, which translates to 139 milligrams per deciliter. In fact, my doctor here has said that I should be targeting a, quote, 40% reduction in LDL. Now, I am not even 1% concerned about having, quote, high LDL for a number of reasons. For one, the countries that have the highest LDL levels actually have the longest life expectancies. Across all the data on LDL and heart disease, there is not even a correlation between high LDL levels and heart disease. But to me, the most compelling evidence is this study right here done in 2009. This was published in the American Heart Journal. What they did in the study is they looked at 136,000 people. Now, these people had all been hospitalized with severe heart complications, including heart disease and heart attacks. What they did with these people is they looked at their blood work within 24 hours of hospitalization. And what they found is that roughly 50% of these people had what is considered low LDL. Now, if high LDL did cause heart disease, these findings right here, they would be impossible. This whole hypothesis that high LDL is the driver of heart issues only became the leading theory because of fraudulent studies bought and paid for by the sugar industry. At the time the sugar industry conducted these studies, the rates of every disease, they were skyrocketing. So the sugar industry, they came up with a plan to divert the blame from themselves, and they hired a man named Ancel Keys. Now, what he did was conduct a massive multi-country study, and he's found 7 countries that showed a link between saturated fat intake and heart disease. So what he did is publish these findings. However, he actually looked at 22 different countries. In 15 of them, there was no link, but he decided to leave out all that data. And because saturated fat is high in cholesterol, the two became sort of synonymous with heart disease, and since then, everyone's blamed them. And because at the time, heart disease was this relatively new thing, there were very few people actually researching the true cause of it. So this became the accepted science and got put into every medical textbook across the entire world, basically. Now, since then, like we've just been looking at, there's been a ton of data that has come out in complete contrary to these original findings. Well, it's not even really in contrary to these original findings when you look at the full data across all 22 countries. What I should say is that there's been a ton of data showing this LDL hypothesis is completely wrong. However, the reason it's still in medical textbooks is for one reason. Well, actually, maybe I should say for 16 billion reasons. And that is because there is a drug called statins. Now, how statins work is they bring LDL levels down. And this drug makes over $16 billion per year. Anyways, there it is, my blood work after eating only meat and eggs for 1,000 days with no fruits and vegetables. I would love to have had absolutely everything tested so I could show you that, but unfortunately here in New Zealand, it's very hard to get adequate blood testing done. Maybe I should start my own blood testing company. You know, might be a little bit outside of my budget, so if there's anyone watching and you own a venture capital firm or something, send me an email and maybe we could set up a New Zealand blood testing company together. Anyway, as always, great speaking with you, and I'll see you next time.